Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the tragic case of John Kellet and the murder of Thomas Bainbridge, which took place in the Barnard Castle area in 1870. I hope you will find the story interesting. John Kellet was born in Durham in around 1818 to parents John and Hannah. He married Jane in around 1842 and the couple had at least 2 children together. John was a widow and lived in a place called Woodland near Barnard Castle and worked as a coal miner. In 1870, his married daughter Hannah had been living with him due to her ill health, and her husband Thomas Bainbridge had been living away from his wife for around 6 weeks. Thomas Bainbridge, the victim, was born in around 1849 in Durham to unknown parents, although it is possible that his mother was called Jane. He had married Hannah Kellet in around 1869. However, it is possible they had married earlier, as it is suggested that they had 2 children, both born prior to 1869. But of course they may have had the children before they got married. Thomas and his wife do seem to have previously lived together, but in February of 1870, as said before, Hannah had been unwell and had returned home so that she could be taken care of, and Thomas was living with his mother. Thomas does appear to be someone who was quite fond of drinking. Before we go any further, can I just say, if you do find this video interesting, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. It really is very much appreciated, and it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. On the night of February the 12th, 1870, Thomas Bainbridge went to the home of his father-in-law to see his wife. When he arrived, the door was locked. Thomas was, at the time, quite drunk, and he knocked, shouted and swore, asking for the door to be opened. Martha Wall, who was the housekeeper for the Kellet family, was about to open the door when Thomas seemed to force it open. As he went inside, his father-in-law, John Kellet, reached for his gun and began to head towards Thomas. A scuffle took place in the house, and in moments both Thomas and John were outside. They were both trying to get hold of the gun. A moment later, the gun went off and Thomas fell to the ground. John immediately went back inside, and shortly afterwards some men carried Thomas into John's home, and the police and a doctor were sent for. When Pacey Han arrived, he found Thomas lying on the floor, clearly in great pain, and John Kellet had gone to his bed and was asleep. Pacey Han arrested John for the attempted murder of Thomas, and John said, "He was breaking in and I was defending my home." Dr. Mitchell arrived a little after 3 a.m. He found Thomas still lying on the floor. He treated his wounds and was quickly aware that the man would not survive. He stayed with him until a little after 8 a.m. the following morning. Thomas Bainbridge died just after 1:30 p.m. on the 13th of February. John Kellet was then charged with his willful murder. The inquest was held at Woodland near Barnard Castle before Deputy Coroner Dean. It was not stated who had identified the body of Thomas Bainbridge, but it is possible that his wife may have done this. Thomas Finley said he was a shoemaker living near Barnard Castle. He said on the night of the 12th he had been in a public house known only as Rains. He said both Thomas and John had been there at the same time. He said he did not notice the 2 men argue and felt they were all on friendly terms. He said John was the first to leave and Thomas left shortly after him. Thomas Finley said when he left the pub he was passing close to John's house and he saw Thomas Bainbridge outside knocking on the door. He heard him swear, asking for someone to open the door and let him in or he would smash it in. Thomas Finley said Bainbridge only seemed to wait a few moments before he began to kick the door. It then burst open. He said he was not certain if the door had been opened or if the force of the kick had opened it. He said he went a little closer and saw John Kellet taking his gun down from the wall. This scared him and he ran away. However, Thomas Finley said after only going a short distance he turned round and went back. When he reached John's house, he saw Thomas Bainbridge on his knees as if he had fallen. John was a few yards away from him. He was on one knee, pointing the gun towards Thomas Bainbridge. Thomas Finley said he then heard the gun go off, and again he said he ran away. When he came back, he saw two men carrying Thomas Bainbridge into the house. He said he then went to find someone else to go for a police officer. John Kellet then spoke to Thomas Finley and asked him if he was sure he had seen him take the gun down from the wall, and he said that he had been sure. John said he could not have seen this, as when the door burst open there was a scuffle and he had been knocked from his feet to the ground. Thomas Finley was then asked if he had run away because he had seen the gun, and he said yes, this was why he had been afraid and ran away. Martha Wall of Woodland near Barnard Castle said she was the housekeeper for John Kellet. She said on the night of the 12th, John had been out and he returned at around midnight. She said as soon as he came in, she locked the door and he took off his coat and sat down in a chair by the fire. She said a few minutes later, Thomas came to the door. He knocked to be let in and shouted something. She said she couldn't tell that he was drunk. She said Hannah shouted telling him to go away and come back when he was sober. Martha said Thomas then swore and said, "Open the door or I will kick it in." She said he was knocking loudly as he said this. She went to the door and was about to open it when he began to kick it, and suddenly it flew open and Thomas came inside. John then went to get his gun down, and she said he told her he would get rid of Thomas. He came towards the door and Thomas grabbed the gun. She said she, too, grabbed for it, and all three struggled for a few moments. Then her feet were knocked from under her and they all fell down. When she got back up, she could not get near the gun, and Thomas seemed to drag John outside. She said as they went out, they both fell down the outside steps, and she watched them get up again, still struggling for the gun, and she turned her back to go inside. She said Hannah and her two young children were all screaming. Martha said she had not gone far and had her back to the door when she heard the gun go off. She turned and looked outside. The two men were now a little apart from each other, with John closest to the door. She could not see what had happened and came back inside and went towards the bed where Hannah was lying. She said John came inside behind her and she asked him what he had done, but he did not reply. Martha said that both Thomas and John had been drinking and seemed to be the worse for drink, but she felt that Thomas was much more drunk than John. She ended by saying that shortly after this, two men carried Thomas into the house and lay him down on the floor. She did not explain why no one in the house had sent for a doctor to take care of Thomas. Elijah Walker of Barnard Castle said he had also been in the public house on the night of the 12th when Thomas and John had been there. He said the two men spoke of the housekeeper, Martha Wall. He said he knew that Thomas did not get on well with her. He said the two men were not angry with each other, and John left a little before Thomas. He said he left just after this and was walking home with John Finley when they heard the sound of a gunshot in the direction of John Kellet's home. He said John Finley said, "Let's go and see what that was about," and they headed towards John Kellet's home. He said when they got there, Thomas was lying on the ground and John Kellet was standing close by with the gun in his hand. By now they had been joined by Mr. Rain from the pub. He said they took the gun away from John Kellet and had to break it to discharge the other cartridge. He said John Kellet spoke to him saying, "I hope you were going to fix that," and Elijah said he told him, "We will see once we have sorted this bad job out first." He said he then spoke to Thomas and asked him who had shot him, and he replied, saying, "John Kellet, and he had no reason to do it." By now, he said John Kellet had gone inside. He said along with Mr. Rain and John Finley, they then carried Thomas into John Kellet's house and placed him on the floor. John Finley gave the same evidence as Elijah would. Thomas Rain said he was the innkeeper at Woodland near Barnard Castle. He said on the night of the 12th he had emptied the bar and was about to close up when he heard the sound of a gunshot. He looked outside. He said it was a clear moonlit night and he clearly saw Thomas falling forward and John Kellet kneeling on the ground with a gun pointed towards him. He said he quickly went over and was met there by Elijah Wood and John Finley. He said John Kellet did not resist as they took the gun from him, and when he asked him why he had done it, he said John did not explain but simply said, "He is a dead man," meaning Thomas, and walked away. He said he had helped to carry Thomas inside and then sent for a doctor. P.C. Hahn of Linsack said he had heard of the disturbance around an hour after it had taken place, and he had made his way to John Kellet's house, arriving at around 2 a.m. He said when he went inside, he found Thomas lying on the floor. He was bleeding quite badly and seemed to be in a lot of pain. He was told that the doctor had been sent for. He said he asked Thomas who had shot him, and he said John Kellet. P.C. Hahn said John was asleep in the room, and bizarrely, he seems to have allowed him to continue sleeping, as he stated that when John awoke an hour later at 3 a.m., he told him he would have to arrest him for the assault on Thomas Bainbridge. He said John replied saying, "I am aware of that. It was not my fault. He was breaking into my house and trying to drag me out of the door. I am allowed to defend myself in my own home, and I do not regret what happened. I would do the same again." P.C. Hahn said on the way to Staindrop, John had said to him, "It was a wonder no one else was shot." He said he later went back to the house and checked the door. He found no sign that the door was broken, the lock was fine, and the door was not damaged in any way. Dr. Mitchell of Barnard Castle said he had been sent for in the early hours of the 13th of February. He said when he arrived at John Kellet's house, he found Thomas still lying on the floor. He was very badly wounded, and it was clear he had been shot. He said there was little he could do for him, and he did not think he would live long. He dressed his wounds and stayed with him until around 8 a.m. when he left. He said he had been told later that Thomas had died at around 1:30 p.m. that afternoon. Dr. Mitchell said he had also performed the post-mortem on the body of Thomas Bainbridge, and it was his professional opinion that death had been due to blood loss from the gunshot wound. He said he felt that Thomas must have been crouched down when he had been shot, as the bullet had gone into the lower part of his body. Hannah Bainbridge, although still unwell, did give evidence at the inquest. However, I was not able to find any details of what she had said. The coroner then spoke to the jury, stating that when he first heard of this case, he had hoped it was a situation of death by misadventure, but after hearing the evidence, he now felt it was a much more serious case. He said it was for the jury to decide if they believed this was a case of willful murder or one of manslaughter. The jury, who retired for 45 minutes, returned a verdict of guilty of willful murder, and John Kellet was committed for trial. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Thomas Bainbridge. However, I am aware that Thomas was buried at Linsack Churchyard, which is close to Butter Knoll near Barnard Castle. I am not aware of Thomas having any family in the area other than his mother, so this was possibly another case of a pauper's funeral. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Thomas anywhere in the churchyard. The trial took place in Durham in March of 1870 before Mr. Justice Wiles. John pleaded not guilty to the charge of willful murder. And as is often the case, the evidence given at the trial is very much the same as that given at the inquest, so I will only include any new information. It was said that Hannah Bainbridge was too ill to attend, and her statement had been taken at home. This was read to the court, and for the main part it was the same as the evidence given by Martha Wall at the inquest. And Hannah also stated that when her father had taken the gun down, he had spoken to Thomas and told him that he would shift him and that he must defend his own house, and he then told Thomas to leave as both barrels of his gun were loaded. Martha Wall now added to her statement, saying that Thomas was very drunk and violent when he had come to the door, and once it was open he had struck John in the face and torn his shirt. This was something that she had not mentioned previously. No further evidence was given, and John did not give evidence on his own behalf. The prosecution stated that there was no real reason for John to take down his gun. He said bad words was not enough, and if a blow had been struck, was this really enough to justify what he had done? He said if the jury felt that the gun had been fired without any intent on the part of the prisoner, then he would still be guilty of manslaughter. The defence then spoke to the jury. He stated that John had not intended to shoot Thomas. When he had taken the gun down, he had only wanted to frighten him. He did not want to shoot him. He said that unless the judge stated that taking a gun to frighten someone was against the law, then the jury should look on this as an accident and find the prisoner not guilty. The judge then spoke to the jury, stating that no man should threaten another with a deadly weapon unless their life was in danger, and he did not feel that John's life had been in danger. He did not agree that to frighten someone with a gun was a blameless act. He then stated that the jury must decide if John had intended to kill Thomas or if the gun had gone off by accident. The jury, who retired for 30 minutes, returned a verdict of guilty of manslaughter against John Kellet. The judge then spoke to John, stating that this was indeed a bad case of manslaughter, and for this reason he would sentence him to 10 years penal servitude. John Kellet was then removed from the dock. John would later be sent to Portland Prison to serve out his sentence, and it is not clear when he was released. However, by 1881 he was back living at Woodland and was again working as a coal miner, and he shared his home with John Kellet, who I believe was his grandson. And it is possible that he died in Durham in around 1903, which would have made him around 85 years old at the time of his death. And sadly, it would seem that Hannah Bainbridge would not recover from her unknown illness, and she died in April of 1870. She does not appear to be buried with her husband, as her place of burial is listed as Cockfield, a village close to Woodland where she had lived. Hannah was only around 26 years old at the time of her death. This was once again a very strange case. I cannot understand why John Kellet acted the way he did. Everyone said that he and Thomas were on good terms and had not argued, and Hannah had not left her husband because of ill use. She had left him because she was ill and wanted to be taken care of by her family. Thomas seems to have visited often and had actually visited earlier on the night of his death, and until later that night everything had been fine. It seems to be a simple case of both John and Thomas being drunk, and perhaps because Thomas did not like the housekeeper Martha when she told him he could not come in, he became angry and tried to force the door open, and this in turn angered John and made him threaten Thomas with the gun. Although this does not truly make sense, as he must have known the man at the door was his son-in-law, not a stranger, so surely even if he was angry and very drunk, he did not need his gun. It does seem that although he did threaten Thomas, John did not shoot him on purpose. It seems more likely that the gun did go off during the fight, although they were said to be apart from each other when the gun went off. So this may have been at the point when they let go of each other after the fight, and both men may have fallen, and that was how the gun went off. It really does sound like two drunken men who did really not know what they were doing, which sadly resulted in the death of Thomas Bainbridge. Were the jury correct to find John guilty of manslaughter? Well, yes, I think they were. I think he did not initially intend to shoot Thomas. I think the fight between the two men made the situation worse, and when the gun went off it was an accident, but his lack of concern afterwards made manslaughter the best verdict. However, I think the things John said afterwards and his lack of concern for Thomas do not fully mean that he did not care. I think they were more of an indication of how drunk he was, and he perhaps didn't even realise that Thomas was so seriously hurt. This may also explain why he simply went inside and went to bed, and nobody sent for a doctor. Was the judge correct to send John to prison for 10 years? Well, I think the judge may have taken more notice of the remarks John made after Thomas was shot about not being sorry for what he had done, and that he would do the same again if he had to. And I think the judge gave him a longer sentence to teach him a lesson for this reason. And if I am honest, accidental shooting or not, I think it was the sentence he deserved. And I just want to say I'm pleased I said shot there instead of shot, because it could have been a lot worse. But anyway, but what do you think? Do you think John intended to shoot Thomas when he got his gun? Or do you think he really did just mean to frighten him? And the fact that they were both drunk and ended up fighting resulted in the gun going off by accident when the pair of them separated, perhaps in a sort of tug-of-war kind of motion, and that was how the gun went off. Do you think there was a little more bad feeling between John and Thomas than we were told? or was it again simply the drink that caused the fight? Do you think the jury were correct to find John guilty of manslaughter, or do you think it should have been murder? And do you think 10 years in prison was long enough, or do you think it was actually too long? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week.